In 1154, in the royal palace of Palermo, Sicily, a masterpiece was unveiled that would revolutionize how humanity understood the world. The Tabula Rogeriana, a silver disc over 2 meters wide, inscribed with the most accurate map ever created, showing lands from Iceland to China, from Scandinavia to the heart of Africa. The man who created this wonder was Abu Abdullah Muhammad Al-Idrisi Al-Qurtubi Al-Hassani, a Muslim geographer from Morocco, working at the Christian court of Norman Sicily. His achievement represents one of the greatest examples of interfaith scientific collaboration in history. For over 300 years, Al-Idrisi's maps guided sailors across the Mediterranean, merchants along the Silk Road, and explorers venturing into unknown territories. Columbus consulted his work before sailing to the Americas. Portuguese navigators used his African coastal descriptions. His geographical treatise remained the most authoritative guide to the world until the age of exploration. How did a Muslim scholar from the far west of the Islamic world become the greatest geographer of medieval Europe? What circumstances allowed him to synthesize the geographical knowledge of three civilizations, Islamic, Byzantine, and Latin, into a single unprecedented work? Today we'll explore the life of Al-Idrisi, from his scholarly formation in Cordoba to his groundbreaking work in Sicily. This is the story of how one man's curiosity around the world created the foundation for all future geographical science. Abu Abdullah Muhammad Al-Idrisi was born around 1100 in Ceuta, Morocco. His intellectual formation took place in Cordoba, the brilliant capital of Islamic Spain. His family claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, through the Idris dynasty that had once ruled Morocco, giving him both noble lineage and scholarly tradition. Cordoba's youth was arguably the most learned city in Europe. Its libraries contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, Greek philosophical works, Roman geographical treatises, Persian astronomical texts, and Indian mathematical skills, all translated into Arabic and studied by Muslim scholars. Al-Idrisi's education reflected the best of Islamic scholarly tradition. He studied not just geography but astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine. The Islamic world had inherited and expanded upon Greek geographical knowledge, particularly the works of Ptolemy, while adding observations from Muslim travelers who had journeyed from Spain to China. At Al-Idrisi's time, Islamic geographers had already corrected many errors in the Ptolemy's work. Al-Khwarizmi had improved calculations of the Earth's circumference. Al-Batini had refined astronomical observations, and Ibn Hakl had provided detailed descriptions of the Islamic world. Al-Idrisi absorbed this rich tradition while preparing to transcend it. Islamic geography was both practical and theoretical. It served the needs of merchants, pilgrims, and administrators, while also representing a form of worship, as understanding God's creation was considered a religious duty. This combination of practical utility and spiritual motivation drove Islamic geographical achievements to unprecedented levels. Al-Idrisi's scholarly world was disrupted by political upheaval. The Almoravid invasions of Al-Andalus in the early 12th century brought a more austere form of Islamic rule that was less tolerant of philosophical speculation and scientific inquiry. Many scholars fled, and the great libraries of Cordoba began to decline. Around 1138, Al-Idrisi arrived in Sicily, then ruled by the Norman king Roger II. This island at the center of the Mediterranean had become one of medieval Europe's most remarkable cultural experiments, a kingdom where Latin Christians, Greek Orthodox Muslims, and Jews lived under Norman's rules. Roger II was an extraordinary monarch, a Norman knight who appreciated Islamic learning, a Christian king who employed Muslim administrators, and a political pragmatist who understood that knowledge was power. His court in Palermo attracted scholars from across the Mediterranean world. Sicily under Roger II represented medieval multiculturalism at its finest. The king's chancery issued documents in Latin, Greek, and Arabic. Islamic artists decorated Christian churches. Jewish scholars translated between different traditions. It was the perfect environment for a project as ambitious as Al-Idrisi's would become. Al-Idrisi's arrival at Roger's court was well timed. The king was planning military campaigns and needed accurate geographical information. Al-Idrisi's combination of noble lineage, Islamic learning, and geographical expertise made him invaluable to a ruler whose ambitions stretched across the Mediterranean. For Roger II and his Norman nobles, employing Muslim scholars like Al-Idrisi was both practical politics and intellectual curiosity. They needed administrators who understood their diverse subjects and scholars who could access the superior learning of the Islamic world. Some Muslim scholars criticized Al-Idrisi for serving a Christian king, but others recognized that intellectual work transcended religious boundaries and that preserving and advancing geographical knowledge served God regardless of political circumstances. Some Christian clerics were suspicious of Islamic influence at the court, but others, particularly those with scholarly inclinations, recognized the value of accessing Islamic learning through scholars like Al-Idrisi. Al-Idrisi's early work at Roger's court involved practical geographical projects, mapping Sicily for administrative purposes, plotting potential military campaigns, and charting commercial routes that could increase royal revenues. These projects demonstrated his abilities and built trust with the king. Around 1140, King Roger commissioned Al-Idrisi to undertake an unprecedented project, create the most complete and accurate description of the world ever attempted. The king provided unlimited resources, access to royal libraries, and most importantly, the ability to gather information from across the Mediterranean world. Al-Idrisi's methodology was revolutionary. Rather than relying solely on ancient texts, he systematically interviewed travelers, merchants, sailors, and diplomats who visited Roger's court. Sicily's position as the Mediterranean crossroads meant that information flowed through Palermo from across the known world. Merchants brought information about Africa's trade routes. Byzantine diplomats described the geography of Eastern Europe. Crusader knights provided details about the Holy Land. Muslim travelers shared knowledge of India and the Far East. Al-Idrisi synthesized all this information with existing geographical literature. The project became truly collaborative. Al-Idrisi worked with Christian monks who had traveled to Jerusalem, Jewish merchants who traded across the Mediterranean, and Muslim scholars who made pilgrimage to Mecca. This interfaith scholarly cooperation was unprecedented in medieval Europe. Al-Idrisi's approach represented the best of Islamic scientific method, empirical observations, systematic data collection, critical evaluation of sources, and synthesis of diverse traditions. His work showed how Islamic scholarship could advance human knowledge when given proper resources and political support. For 15 years, Al-Idrisi worked on his masterpiece. He drew maps, wrote detailed geographical descriptions, calculated distances, and constantly revised his work as new information became available. The project consumed the latter part of his life but produced unprecedented results. The resulting work, formerly titled Nuzhat al-Mustah fi Ikhtarak al-Afaq. The resulting work, formerly titled The Pleasure of Him Who Longs to Cross the Horizons, but commonly known as the Book of Roger, contained the most complete geographical description of the medieval world. The centerpiece of Al-Idrisi's project was the Tabula Rogeriana, a circular world map over 2 meters in diameter, engraved on silver, that represented the pinnacle of medieval geographical achievement. Unlike previous maps that were largely symbolic, Al-Idrisi's map was designed for practical use. The map's accuracy was revolutionary. Al-Idrisi correctly depicted the Mediterranean coastlines with unprecedented precision. He accurately showed the course of major rivers like the Nile and Danube. His representation of islands, mountain ranges, and peninsulas was far superior to any previous cartographic work. Where Ptolemy had shown the Indian Ocean as enclosed, Al-Idrisi correctly depicted it as connected to other oceans. He corrected the length of the Mediterranean, improved the shape of the Caspian Sea, and provided the first accurate depiction of the Baltic Sea and Scandinavia. Accompanying the Great Map was an extensive text divided into 7 climate zones, each subdivided into 10 sections. This created 70 detailed regional descriptions that included information about cities, trade routes, natural resources, people, customs, and political structures. The Norman court was amazed by the map's detail and accuracy. Roger II used it for military planning, commercial strategy, and diplomatic negotiations. The king recognized that Al-Idrisi had created an instrument of power as much as a work of scholarship. The European scholars who saw the map recognized its superiority to existing geographical works, but some were reluctant to fully embrace knowledge that came through Islamic sources, reflecting the prejudice of the age. Muslims who learned of Al-Idrisi's work were proud that Islamic scholarship had achieved such heights, though some continued to criticize his service to a Christian king as inappropriate for a descendant of the Prophet. Although the original silver disc was lost during political upheavals, copies of Al-Idrisi's work spread across medieval Europe. His geographical descriptions were translated into Latin and became standard references for centuries. Al-Idrisi's geographical knowledge extended far beyond the Mediterranean. His descriptions of northern Europe showed remarkable accuracy. He correctly described the relationship between the Baltic and North Seas, provided detailed accounts of Scandinavian geography, and even included information about Iceland and Greenland. His knowledge of Africa was unprecedented for a medieval European scholar. Al-Idrisi provided detailed descriptions of North African trade routes, accurate accounts of Nile geography, and information about East African coastal cities that couldn't be matched by European explorers for centuries. Through Islamic trade networks and scholarly connections, Al-Idrisi accessed information about Asia that European scholars wouldn't obtain for centuries. His descriptions of India, Central Asia, and even reports about China show the global reach of Islamic geographical knowledge. Al-Idrisi's maritime knowledge was particularly advanced. He understood seasonal wind patterns, ocean currents, and navigation techniques that were crucial for medieval sea travel. His work provided practical sailing directions that merchants and navigators used for centuries. Al-Idrisi's achievements reflected the global nature of medieval Islamic civilization. Information flowed from Spain to Indonesia through networks of merchants, scholars, and pilgrims. This created geographical knowledge that no other medieval civilization could match. His descriptions of trade routes were particularly valuable. Al-Idrisi mapped the Silk Road with unprecedented detail, described trans-Saharan caravan routes, and provided information about Indian Ocean commerce that revealed the sophisticated nature of his medieval Islamic trade. Al-Idrisi's urban descriptions brought medieval cities to life. He described the markets of Constantinople, the palaces of Baghdad, the libraries of Cordoba, and the ports of Alexandria with detail that helps us understand medieval Islamic urban civilization. What made Al-Idrisi revolutionary wasn't just his access to information, but his scientific approach to geography. He developed techniques for evaluating sources, reconciling contradictory information, and systematically organizing geographical knowledge that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. Al-Idrisi pioneered techniques for measuring distance and calculating coordinates that were far in advance of his time. He understood the problems of map projection and developed methods for representing the curved Earth on flat surfaces with minimal distortion. His climate theory, derived from Greek sources but refined through Islamic observations, divided the world into 7 climate zones based on latitude. The systematic approach allowed him to organize geographical information logically and predict conditions in unexplored regions. Al-Idrisi's combined geographical observation with astronomical calculation in ways that anticipated modern geodesy. He used star positions to determine locations, refined calculations of Earth's circumference, and understood the relationship between celestial observation and terrestrial mapping. Al-Idrisi represented the culmination of centuries of Islamic geographical scholarship. He built on the work of predecessors while adding original observation and methodological innovations that advanced the entire field. European scholars gradually recognized Al-Idrisi's methodological superiority, but it took centuries for European geographical science to adopt his systematic approach to data collection and source evaluation. Modern geographers recognize Al-Idrisi as one of the founders of scientific geography. His emphasis on empirical observation, systematic organization, and critical evaluation of sources established principles that remain fundamental to geographical science today. Al-Idrisi died around 1165, probably in Sicily, having spent over 25 years at Roger II's. His death marked the end of an era, but his geographical legacy was just beginning to influence the wider world. For the next 3 centuries, Al-Idrisi's maps and geographical descriptions remained the most accurate guides to world geography. Mediterranean sailors relied on his coastal descriptions, Overland merchants used his trade route information, and even early Atlantic explorers consulted his work. Christopher Columbus owned copies of Al-Idrisi's work and consulted them while planning his westward voyage to Asia. Portuguese navigators exploring the African coast used his descriptions of African geography. The age of exploration built upon the geographical foundation that Al-Idrisi had established. Al-Idrisi's work was translated into Latin and became a standard text in European universities. Christian scholars who had initially been suspicious of Islamic geographical knowledge came to recognize its superiority and incorporate it into their own work. Within the Islamic world, Al-Idrisi's methodological innovations influenced later geographers like Al-Dimashqi and Abu al-Fida. His systematic approach to organizing geographical information became the standard of Islamic geographical texts. Al-Idrisi's success in Sicily reflected the unique multicultural environment that Norman kings had created. For a brief historical moment, scholars of different faiths could collaborate on equal terms, producing results that none could achieve alone. Al-Idrisi wasn't the only Muslim scholar at Roger's court. The king employed mathematicians, physicians, philosophers, and translators from across the Islamic world. This brain drain from the Islamic world to Sicily enriched Norman culture while advancing human knowledge. The Norman administrative system reflected this multiculturalism. Documents were issued in Arab, Greek, and Latin, depending on the purpose and the audience. This practical multilingualism created an environment where different knowledge traditions could interact and influence each other. Norman Sicily architecture and art showed similar fusion. Islamic geometric patterns decorated Christian churches, Arabic calligraphy appeared alongside Latin inscriptions, and artistic styles blended traditions across the Mediterranean. Norman kings recognized that embracing different culture traditions strengthened rather than weakened their rule. By employing the best minds regardless of religion, they created a more effective and innovative government. All Christian and Muslim religious authorities sometimes criticized the cultural mixing in Norman Sicily, fearing that doctrinal purity would be compromised by excessive contact with other faiths. Historians recognize Norman Sicily as one of the most successful examples of medieval multiculturalism, demonstrating that different civilizations could collaborate productively when political conditions were favorable. Unfortunately, the tolerant environment of Norman Sicily didn't survive political changes. As crusading ideologies intensified and Islamic fundamentalism spread, the space for interfaith scholarly collaboration gradually disappeared. Modern scholars have developed a new appreciation for Al-Idrisi's achievements. When his maps are compared with satellite imagery, their accuracy proves remarkable. His descriptions of coastlines, river systems, and geographical features often match reality better than maps created centuries later. Digital technology has allowed scholars to reconstruct the Tabula Rogeriana and analyze its innovations in detail. Computer analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of map projection, coordinate systems, and geographical relationships that weren't matched until the Renaissance. Modern geographers recognize Al-Idrisi as one of the founders of scientific geography. His emphasis on empirical observations, systematic data collection, and critical source evaluation established methodological principles that remain fundamental to geographical science. Al-Idrisi's work is now taught in universities worldwide as an example of medieval scientific achievement. UNESCO has recognized his geographical text as part of world cultural heritage, acknowledging their contribution to human knowledge. Contemporary historians and geographers still consult Al-Idrisi's work for insights into medieval trade routes, climate conditions, and cultural interactions. His geographical descriptions provide invaluable information about the medieval world that no other source matches. Abu Abdullah Muhammad Al-Idrisi achieved something that seems almost impossible. He mapped the medieval world with accuracy that wouldn't be surpassed for centuries. But his greatest achievement wasn't technical. It was demonstrating that knowledge belongs to all humanity. Working at the crossroads of civilizations, Al-Idrisi showed the greatest advances in human knowledge come not from isolation, but from meeting and mixing of different traditions. His geographical masterpiece was possible only because he could synthesize Islamic scholarship, Christian resources, and Jewish commercial networks. For over 300 years, Al-Idrisi's maps guided human exploration and shaped our understanding of the world. from medieval merchants to Renaissance explorers, from Crusader knights to Muslim pilgrims. Countless people relied on his geographical knowledge to navigate our planet. Today, when we can view our planet from space and map every corner with satellite precision, Al-Idrisi's medieval achievement seems even more remarkable. With only medieval technology and pre-modern travel, he created geographical knowledge that anticipated modern discoveries. The Moroccan geographer who worked in a Norman place, creating maps that guided Christian and Muslim explorers alike, reminds us that knowledge recognizes no borders. In our interconnected world, Al-Idrisi's example of cross-cultural scientific collaboration offers both inspiration and guidance. He began with curiosity about God's creation and ended up by expanding humanity's understanding of our shared world. In bridging civilizations through geography, Al-Idrisi provided that the highest form of scholarship serves not one person or people or faith, but all of humanity. Thank you for listening, and if you like this production, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thank you very much.